In a peaceful neighborhood in the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, mornings were always quiet, except for the occasional barking from behind an old, weathered wooden gate. That's where Max lived, a reddish-brown dog with soulful eyes that seemed to understand everything happening around him. Max wasn't just another dog on the block. There was something about him, a calmness, a gentle gaze, as if he carried a story waiting to be told. Max had been adopted by Mrs. Betty, a widowed woman who had been living alone since her husband passed away. When she found him, he was skinny, with wounded paws and a distrustful look. But all it took was a gentle scratch behind the ears and a piece of toast soaked in milk to begin forming a bond between them. Little by little, Max started sleeping at the foot of her bed, walking with her to the local diner, and even talking to her with his low growls and attentive eyes. The neighborhood kids adored Max. Whenever they passed by, he'd wag his tail so hard it looked like he might take off. They brought him treats, tossed him balls, and made up songs with his name. Max was everyone's dog, but his heart belonged to the woman who gave him a second chance. With her, he learned to trust again, to understand that love isn't something that disappears forever. But the peaceful days began to change. Mrs. Betty started to tire more easily, forget things, and sometimes seemed lost in her own home. Max, as if sensing everything, became even more attentive. He stayed by her side as she sat quietly on the couch for hours, didn't let strangers come near, and barked whenever she left a pan on the stove. It was like he had taken on the role of her guardian with all his heart. Still, the illness stealing Mrs. Betty's memory couldn't be stopped by love alone. The day came when she no longer recognized Max. She looked at him with a mix of curiosity and fear, as if he were a stranger in her own house. Max didn't understand, but he didn't give up either. He sat by her side like he always did and gently rested his head on her lap, waiting for her heart to remember what her mind had forgotten. The neighbors started helping. They took turns looking after Mrs. Betty, but whenever possible, they let Max stay by her side. He seemed to be the one who calmed her. He was the one who, even in silence, let her know she wasn't alone. Max, without understanding words, understood what truly mattered: love, presence, and loyalty. And so, amid fading memories and unwavering devotion, Max became more than just a dog. He was the link between Mrs. Betty's past and present, the silent guardian of her memories. As time went on, Mrs. Betty's memory lapses became more frequent. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and get startled by Max's presence, calling him that strange man or simply ignoring him altogether. But Max never faltered. He'd lie nearby, keeping a respectful distance, just waiting, his deep, calm eyes saying, "I'm here. I've always been here." The neighbors, moved by her condition, created a kind of support system. Mrs. Linda brought warm soup in the evenings. Mr. George made sure her medications were in order. The children still came by to visit Max, and though they didn't fully grasp the seriousness of the situation, they knew something had changed. Max still wagged his tail for them, but his attention was always drawn back toward the house, to Betty. One day, Mrs. Betty wandered out alone and got lost. It was Max who noticed the open gate. He started barking frantically and ran down the street as if he instinctively knew where to look. A few blocks away, he found her sitting on a curb, staring blankly into space, wearing mismatched shoes. Max approached slowly, laid his head in her lap, and stayed there. When the neighbors found them, they were still like that, connected in a silence that said more than words. That moment changed everything for the neighborhood. Max wasn't just a pet. He was the anchor that kept Mrs. Betty tied to the world. The doctors said the illness was progressing, but that emotional connections could help slow it down. And there was Max, day after day, offering his purest love, no expectations, no demands. He became Betty's emotional compass. Over time, she began remembering Max in flashes. She'd call him her furry boy, or sometimes say, with a faint smile, "That little dog sure likes me." Max accepted every tiny victory as a gift. When she would pet his head, even without recalling his name, it was as though every effort had been worth it. One day, a social worker visiting the home suggested that Mrs. Betty be moved to an assisted living facility. The neighborhood was upset, but Max was the one who took it the hardest. That first night without her, he cried. The second night, he wouldn't eat. On the third night, he disappeared. They found him at the entrance of the facility, lying down as if he instinctively knew where she was. Touched by the sight, the staff allowed Max a short visit. From that day on, those visits became part of the routine. Max would walk calmly through the hallways and find Betty in the garden. She smiled more on those days. Sometimes she even said his name. "Max, my good boy," she whispered one afternoon, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time in weeks she had said it. Max's eyes sparkled, and he nuzzled against her like he used to. Max quickly became an unofficial therapy dog at the home. The other residents waited for his visits. He brought a unique kind of peace, one that didn't come from words, but from presence. Without even knowing it, Max continued fulfilling his mission, to love, to care, and to endure. Time, as always, moved forward. Days at the assisted living facility settled into a comforting routine. Morning coffee, group activities, and Max's visits every Tuesday and Thursday. For many residents, he became the highlight of their week. Their eyes would light up the moment they saw his silhouette entering through the front gate, tail wagging, nose sniffing, eyes filled with purpose. For Mrs. Betty, those moments opened little windows in her fading memory. One spring afternoon, the garden was blooming with tulips and daisies. Max ran straight to the wheelchair where Betty was seated. She looked at him and, with a sweet smile, said clearly, "You came, my friend." That simple sentence was enough to bring tears to the eyes of the caregivers. For that moment, it felt as though the old Betty had returned, drawn back by that invisible thread between her and Max. Max, too, had begun to show signs of age. His reddish-brown coat grew silver around the muzzle, his steps slowed, and naps came more frequently. But he never once missed a visit. Even when his legs trembled a bit, even when sleep tugged at him more strongly, Max would always be there, loyal to the end. And everyone knew it wasn't just loyalty, it was love in its purest form. As months passed, Betty's health also declined. On a quiet gray morning in late autumn, she didn't wake up. She passed peacefully, with a soft smile on her face and a folded note resting on her bedside table. The note read, "To my everyday friend. I love you, Max." No one knew exactly when or how she'd written it, but it was there. And when Max felt her absence, he wept in a way only those who've truly loved can understand. In the days that followed, Max grew quiet. He refused treats, ignored his toys, and spent long hours lying in the same corner of the garden where he and Betty used to sit. The staff, moved by his grief, tried to comfort him, but they understood that he needed time. Time to mourn. Time to be silent. He wasn't alone, but he was missing the one soul who had given meaning to his life. Then, in a gesture of love, the staff and residents created a special corner in the garden. A little wooden bench with a plaque that read, "Betty and Max's Bench, where friendship bloomed." They placed photos of the two of them, surrounded by flowers and a soft bed where Max could rest. He visited that spot every day, and slowly, his eyes began to shine again, still with sorrow, but now also with peace. Max lived for a few more beautiful years. He became a symbol of love and resilience. His story inspired others to adopt, to care, to love deeper. A local news channel even did a small piece about him. And when his time came, Max passed peacefully, lying on the bench that bore both their names, like he was going on one last quiet visit. and even after both had gone, the garden remained in bloom. Because where there is true friendship, there is also eternity. And Max, the dog with kind eyes and a faithful soul, proved that love can outlast time, sorrow, and even goodbye.